So when talking about the outlook on Europe, we have to start with our assumption on Russian gas. So in terms of the Russian gas pipeline flows that we've seen last year, Laura has already mentioned that we've seen a decline of 64 BCM compared to the year before, and that has mainly started with a stop of YAML flows via Poland in May, after Gazprom sanctioned Europol. And then in late August, Nord Stream 1 stopped flowing due to repairs. And then there were explosions at Nord Stream 1 and 2 in September, and these are still under investigation. So far, Russian pipe gas is flowing, and it's at a reduced volume, obviously, and it's flowing via Ukraine and Turkey. And the approximate number of the flows is at 1/4 of what it was at the same time last year. So if we continue to see similar approximately flows that we've seen so far, then we estimate a range of decline between 36 to 39 BCM compared to the year before. So currently as well, what we are noticing in terms of the flows, the Russian pipeline gas flows to Europe, is that there seems to be buyer optimization of contracted flows at play, and prices seem to be incentivizing consumers to be taking up more contracted flows compared to the same levels in Jan. What is interesting, and I want to highlight, is that despite specific sanctions from specific countries, there is still additional Russian LNG flowing into the European markets. There was an additional 2.4 million tons of Russian LNG coming into Europe last year compared to the year before. And even year to date, January and February, so far we've seen 0.7 million tons additional LNG from Russia coming into Europe. So in light of reduced Russian gas flows into Europe, where will the additional gas come from? So we will start looking at it from domestic gas production within Europe. And this saw an annual decline of 8% in 2022. EU domestic gas production, we expect to decline by approximately 7% or 3 BCM this year. And in a similar way, we also expect a decline of its percentage share as part of the EU gas consumption. So last year, we've seen EU gas domestic production covering 13% of European gas consumption. And that might be reduced to 12% or even less. The amount of extraction per gas year from the Groningen field, which is one of the largest fields within Europe, has been reduced the last years due to the earthquakes it's been causing, according to the Netherlands central government. So from October 2022, from last year, October, the Groningen field is on the pilot light, which is basically another phrase to say that it's been capped. Production at the field is capped. So for gas year 2022 to 2023, the cap on production was at 2.8 BCM, has been so far, compared to 4.5 BCM compared to the previous gas year. If the geopolitical situation allows for it, then the cabinet wants to stop gas extraction this autumn or at its latest next year. We should hear a bit more from the cabinet, hopefully by June. Production from other fields in the Netherlands also continues to decline, as well as in other parts of Europe as well. But Netherlands specifically has announced earlier this year that they will stop the search for new onshore and offshore oil and gas fields. This is aimed at two targets. One is on the climate, in order to be more aligned with their climate objectives. And the other one is in order to limit any risk of further seismic activity. So what about the other gas pipe into Europe? And before I move to the next slide, you can see in the bottom chart our assumption on the Groningen field production. And you can see that from April, according to the central government numbers, there is expected a decline. But again, that is subject to the geopolitical situation. But as you can see, there's not as much flexibility as there used to be there. So in terms of the other gas pipe supplies to Europe, Norwegian gas production is expected to slightly increase this year, according to a forecast, with the Njord field recently coming back online towards the end of last year. And actually, in a forecast released earlier in the year, the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, they forecasted gas output to increase, to continue unchanged. However, we expect some of the increase to be mainly facilitated via other routes rather than pipe gas into Europe. Laura has already mentioned the Norwegian LNG side. And in terms of the pipe flows to Europe, we expect some of the maintenance that's coming on in summer to actually have an impact and restrict flows into parts of Europe. And more specifically, for the continental Europe, we're expecting the main impact of the maintenance to be seen mainly in May, August, and September. And then for the UK, we're expecting the impact to be from May through August for partial St. Fergus maintenance, and September in Islington and to St. Fergus. Now, as you can see also from the top chart, there are other countries as well that are main key pipe suppliers to Europe. For example, Algeria. And Algeria has plans to increase its oil and gas production this year, but we don't expect all of that increase to come through all the way to Europe. That's because there is rising domestic consumption and also some pipeline constraints. We still expect Algeria to potentially see more increase with the development of gas fields in the Birkin South Basin, and most of the growth in gas flows we expect it to be delivered via Transmed to Italy. There is limited upside potential from Azerbaijan and Libya, and you can see that even though the extent of LNG increase, which is 19.5 BCM increase compared to the year before, it is not enough to cover that red bar in the first chart, which is a decline in Russia. So if no increase in domestic gas production, no substantial increase in pipe gas supplies to Europe, and with limitations to LNG supplies, what will help bridge the gas volumes from Russia? In this case, demand and storage will need to come into play. So there have been EU policies put in place in order to ensure that there is enough storage buffer for security of supply, and there have also been incentives put in place for demand savings. So there has been some data pointing to the fact that during peak cold days, There have been a few times when we've seen them, for example, in December. Data points to not all EU policy initiatives working out during those peak cold days in terms of the gas consumption savings. People are still turning up their heat. So right now, EU gas demand savings are still in place, and they might be extended. We expect some of them to materialize in 2023. In more detail, our assumption is for power demand, as you can see from the top chart, is to see an overall decline. So we expect there to be an increase in solar and wind power gen and capacity as well. Nuclear availability in France is expected to increase. However, most of it will be offset by reduction in nuclear availability in Germany and in Belgium. For industrial gas, some demand is expected to be back. Actually, I tried to confuse you there. You can see the two, the green and the red bar in the chart. And I think this is more to reflect the expectation of H1 versus H2. So, or more like towards the summer, and as we see prices dropping, we might see some comeback of industrial gas. And we're already seeing some signs of it in parts of Europe, like Germany and so on. However, as Alex kindly covered already in the macro section, we don't expect a resurgence in EU industrial production. And by talking to some people within, who are staying in Europe, and that includes some of my family, there are some announcements of job losses on the industrial side. So that might also be one of the reasons we might see a risk to the downside on the industrial side. So if we look at European storage, it started off this year at a high base, plus 32 BCM compared to January last year. And it's currently approximately 62% full. Based on our estimated European gas consumption for 2023, we expect EU gas storage to be at half full by March. And if we are looking further out during the year, then we expect Europe to almost meet its mandated overall storage targets. This is under the assumption of some gas demand rationing to continue in parts of Europe. And we also incorporated some of the declines from milder weather seen so far. The demand rationing expectation is based on the fact that we expect the public awareness to still be taken into account by the consumers due to improved efficiencies and also due to high bills. However, most of the analytics side that we've seen, mainly covering the talk about European gas storage expectation, is mainly done on an aggregated basis. And if we look at it from a regional perspective within Europe, there are still risks remaining. For example, as of 25th of February, when I last checked, the gas storage in France, and France has actually much less capacity than Germany, for example, and that one was at 44%. So this shows that, yeah, fears of depleted storage are subdued for now, but there is still high risk from any outages and from LNG availability, especially stemming from the uncertainty of Chinese gas consumption as the market reopens, and there are also regional differences within Europe itself. Obviously, but there is still a key uncertainty in the forecast, and when looking at daily gas availability, there is an upside risk from the substantial annual decrease in Russian gas flows to the EU, which is expected to occasionally bring back some gas price volatility, especially in the summer. So to summarize, some new additional liquefaction capacity for this year is expected, and Freeport restart will add to supply growth. We expect a revival in Asia's LNG requirements, led mainly by China, as covered before, but not at levels seen in 2021. This will result in European LNG availability increasing by 19.5 BCM this year. Most of the reduction in Russian gas supplies to Europe is set to be replaced by LNG. However, there is still limited upside potential from other sources of gas supplies. And some EU gas consumption savings and storage will need to cover up some of that shortage. Fears of depleted storages are for now subdued, especially if we look at it on an aggregated basis for Europe. But this is not time to fully relax, as there is still risk from any unplanned outages, from LNG availability, Chinese LNG demand mentioned before, and from specific timelines when we have maintenance and specific regional differences. To conclude, I would like to highlight that this year might be a tale of two halves. So with our expectation of higher LNG demand in China in the second half of the year, there is a higher probability of increased competition for LNG cargoes between Europe and Asia from this summer. Hopefully, we're all prepared. Thank you.